So we just had a gigantic Nintendo Direct. Actually, I think it's debatable if it was gigantic or not, but for the sake of this video, we're gonna call it gigantic. What happened in this Nintendo Direct was very, very interesting because towards the end of the Direct, Nintendo announced something that probably should have already existed within this system a long time ago, but that's okay. Nintendo's usually always late to things. We got this big family share system where it's like a digital game card is how they announced it, where you're gonna be able to share your digital games with other people for like 14 days and stuff. And, you know, it's like, well, wow, I guess that's kind of cool, although we thought we had this already, but, you know, that's okay. Either way, it was interesting that Nintendo announced this because they said that this update was coming at the end of April. Then they updated their website with more information about this gigantic Nintendo update that's going to add the digital game card update, where I'm just calling it family sharing at this point because I feel like the concept of being able to give the game to somebody else for 14 days, I feel like that's like the family share, like the Steam family share, but it's besides the point. There was things in the fine print that got pointed out that not many people are pointing out, and I don't think Nintendo really realizes what they did here, because I think they probably would have wanted to show this off next week at the big Nintendo Direct of the Switch 2. But the point is, Nintendo accidentally leaked things about the Nintendo Switch 2. I'm going to read to you what was shown off. Available on Nintendo Switch, Nintendo Switch Lite, Nintendo Switch OLED model systems in late April 2025. A system update is required to use this feature on Nintendo Switch systems. Okay, nothing crazy about that. Just wait, let's get further into what we're about to read here. Compatible systems must be linked into a Nintendo account to use virtual game cards. Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive games and Nintendo Switch 2 edition games can only be loaded on a Nintendo Switch 2 system? Hold up. Okay, well, what do these things make sense? Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive games. Okay, yeah, that all makes sense. Nintendo, what is Nintendo Switch 2 edition games? Oh my gosh. We finally have confirmation of something that we have been speculating over the last few years when it came to the next Nintendo console. And that is enhanced updates for their first-party games. Now, this is something that we saw PlayStation and Xbox do with their brand new consoles, the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, where if you did a game that was on Xbox One, PS4, it would get a next-gen update to where it could have some sort of like 60 FPS mode, basically. That's about all you would get, unless it was like a remastered edition, because, you know, PS5, they love their remastered games. We have something called the Switch 2 Edition. So, there's a lot that this could be. We've already known that something like this might have already been in the works if we looked at some of the past Nintendo games that have come out for the Nintendo Switch. And I think this is exciting because I feel like the last few Switch games, at least from Nintendo's side, it has been noticeable that the frame rate is just all over the place. Not to mention, it's cool to know that we're getting something like this, that we're probably going to get more information on this next week. But for example, we've known that something like this must have been in the works for over a year now. Because if we look back at some of the older releases that have come out, Paper Mario Thousand Year Door Remake, for whatever reason, when that game came out, it was found in the code that there was a 4K version of this game out there. 4K? That doesn't make sense. The Switch can't do 4K unless the Switch 2 does 4K. And, you know, a 4K version makes sense. If that's the case, I feel like this 4K version exists for a lot of the first-party Nintendo games already, and like almost every single first-party Nintendo game is going to be getting this free update. At least we're hoping it's a free update, to where it's an enhanced version for the Nintendo Switch 2. Another game that was found to have some sort of different mode that's just not for the Switch is Xenoblade Chronicles X. It was found into the code that there is a 60 frames per second mode into the game. Obviously, there's not 60 frames per second in the game, so why is this in there? Because I bet a Xenoblade X Switch 2 update is going to happen to where we can play this game at 60 frames per second. My only concern is the wording of Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, because that kind of sounds like something that Sony would be doing, making like a PS5 remastered version of a PS4 game and then charge full price, or like a $10 upgrade. I'm hoping that Nintendo is not following that pattern to where we're gonna have to pay $10 to get these new versions, because they're called Switch 2 editions. So they could easily market that as like a updated remastered Switch 2 edition, which hopefully Nintendo doesn't do that. I could see Nintendo doing that, and I could also see Nintendo just giving it out for free. Hopefully that's the case. Obviously, these are two games that would heavily benefit off that update, especially since we know it exists. But there are a few other games that I wanted to talk about today that I think could really benefit off this. In fact, I think Nintendo might have accidentally leaked a big part of their presentation next week, because I guarantee you they're going to announce this Nintendo Switch 2 edition of games with good old Tears of the Kingdom right here. Obviously, this is a game that was very noticeable to be with frame rate drops. Breath of the Wild had its frame rate drops too, but Tears of the Kingdom, I would argue, had more. And if they were to promote this game as 60 FPS on the Switch 2, that would be a very big deal for people. It would also show the power of the Switch 2 system, and I think a lot of people would gravitate towards a 60 FPS Tears of the Kingdom mode. These type of modes have been very popular with Xbox and PlayStation 5. I mean, especially with the PlayStation 5, considering that half of its library is PS4 remastered games. So I guess Nintendo is trying to take a page off of Sony's book, which is doing that, but hopefully it's free. Just free updates that's already existed, hopefully. I'm hoping. Oh my gosh, please. Please, Nintendo. Not to mention, if we were to go by leaks, we know that Nintendo was actually showing off to investors Breath of the Wild running at 4K 60 FPS. Now, again, those are leaks, and that's also to investors. So that Breath of the Wild 4K 60 FPS might have just been an investor's demo. It might just not be something that was ever supposed to come out. But I feel like those are two games that would easily get updates from Nintendo for the Switch 2. They would definitely benefit off a Switch 2 edition update. There's plenty of games out there that could really benefit from this, and another one that I was thinking about was Mario Luigi Brothership. While this game sucked, it definitely had frame rate dips that was very noticeable, and I could just see the Switch 2 being able to have a free update, hopefully, to where this really just sparks and looks absolutely beautiful. Which the game looks beautiful, but unfortunately the game sucks. I feel like some other games out there that could really benefit this that we're going to see utilized next week is probably Meteoroid Prime 4. Now, I know this is probably a hot take, but to be honest with you guys, I wasn't really impressed with what we saw today from that Nintendo Direct. I thought compared to the previous footage that we had seen, this one looked kind of disappointed. It was a little bit of a downgrade. I know that's a hot take, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but I feel that that game is going to be heavily promoted to be onto the Switch 2, which Prime 4, Switch 2, we don't even have the release date of that game because we're gonna get it next week. I'm telling y'all, they're gonna promote that game heavily as a Switch 2 title, and they're gonna promote that the Nintendo Switch 2 edition of the game is 60 FPS, and it's just absolutely stunning. Another game that could benefit off of this, but even if it did benefit off of this, it's still gonna look absolutely horrible, and Game Freak's not gonna know what to do with it. It's Pokemon Legends ZA. Maybe there's a nice Nintendo Switch 2 edition update coming to that, but at the same time, I feel like Game Freak, they'll look at the Switch 2 and be like, oh man, how do we use this? I think at the end of the day, I don't think it has anything to do with the hardware when it comes to these Pokemon games. I genuinely just think that Game Freak does not know how to make a home console work because they are used to the handhelds. I think that is why Pokemon has never been able to upgrade into, I guess people are making the comparisons to Xenoblade. I think that's a little bit too strong a comparison to compare the graphics and all that to that. But at the end of the day, I don't see it as a hardware issue. If Game Freak was smart, they could market it with the Switch 2 edition, and these Pokemon fans would probably be really happy with that. They would still probably buy the game no matter what, because that's how Pokemon fans are. Another thing that I think is going to really benefit off these Nintendo Switch 2 editions is probably something like Tomodachi Life that just got announced. Obviously, we know that the Switch 2 is coming out this year, probably within the summer, but we know that Nintendo is still going to be making games for the Switch 1 now. And Tomodachi Life is coming out in 2026. And if you look back at that trailer, there was some frame rate drips right there. Drops in there. And that was because they were showing the Switch 1 version. That game is obviously going to have a Switch 2 edition, and it's going to run absolutely phenomenal on there. I also know there was the brand new Rhythm Heaven game. If that has frame rate drops, which I can't imagine that having frame rate drops, but the type of game that is, I will be surprised. But they could market a Switch 2 edition out there for that. And any other Switch 1 games coming out is going to obviously have a Switch 2 edition. As I've said many times before, I think the Switch 1 still has some more games coming out this year and probably within the next year. I think it's been proven that Nintendo is not dropping support of that system yet because of the massive success that is the Switch. I think that there's going to be a lot of things coming from these Switch 2 editions. My only concern is that they're going to charge for these. I am hopeful that they can just give it for free, because I know PlayStation has done free updates like that before, and then sometimes they'll go out of their way to charge $10 if you already own the game, or just release it as a brand new game. And the only one that I could see Nintendo maybe re-releasing a game as like a brand new $60, $70 release is probably the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, because they're gonna realize that those two games are very, I don't know what are the words, that would sell really well for them, because those are modes that people would really want. Now, what do you guys think? I think Nintendo kind of messed up here and leaked something that they did not want yet. And I'm sure they're going to regret this, because like I said, I'm expecting that the presentation that we're getting next week is going to be focused on this at some point in there, where a good, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes could be just talking about Switch 2 editions and the free updates. But who knows? Maybe Nintendo did this intentionally. One thing that I know that was not intentional, at least I don't think this is intentional, they accidentally leaked the C button on the Joy-Cons through the Nintendo Today app. So I feel like things like this was more of a mistake, and they just weren't thinking, because there's no way that that was supposed to happen, but it did. I want to hear what you guys have to say. What are some games that you would like to see get updated with a Nintendo Switch 2 edition? For me, I feel like the Xenoblade Chronicles X would be absolutely phenomenal. I feel like Splatoon 3, that was something that I noticed a lot, especially like if you look at the characters from far away, you can see the frame rate drops there. There's a lot that I think Nintendo could do with this, and I'm very excited to see what they do. I feel like, if anything, I think a good majority of these titles are getting updates. If the Switch 2 is actually going to have 4K, they're probably going to have to update every single game to have that 4K support. But I would love to hear what you guys want from these editions, and just say what you want updated, whether that's resolution, frame rate, all that good stuff. Guys, I have been talking for way too much. Make sure to backslash that subscribe button, like the video, check out the Twitter, check out the Discord server, check out the Instagram, all that good stuff. We got our 24-hour live stream this Tuesday, 10 a.m. Be there or be square. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.